You are listening to a TechSide Network podcast, techside.net, casual conversation from technically passionate people.
This is Americanitis, episode 22 for May 30th, 2020. I'm your host, Daniel Sagner. This podcast contains harsh language and covers adult topics. You'll be challenged by views with which you do not agree. We may not be politically correct, but we are correct about politics. I was hoping to talk about the murder that took place in Minneapolis, but three things stopped me. One, the chips haven't landed yet. Yes, this looks like murder to me, but how it's dealt with will expose more than the video. Two, I'm not really a news show. You could get more information more readily elsewhere. And three, while this is a tragic showcase of misuse of force, there's something even more sinister happening, if you can believe it. While our duly elected dumbasses continue to beclown themselves with overbearing restrictions on our liberties on the COVID front, another thread is being pulled. Amplifying echoes of 2016, floating heads are grandstanding about our enemies being amplified on social media, or the censoring of certain voices on those platforms. One side warns about the continued Russian menace buying Facebook ads, while the other side whines about being shadow banned on Twitter. Whether it's Reds under the bed or the closing of the Overton window, everyone has an opinion, and they all agree on one thing. Social media needs to be regulated. Ted Cruz, man. That guy, such a snake. He says things every now and again, and I say to myself, did I miss something? Did this guy change? That sounds so pro-liberty. Then he'll get on Twitter, ironically, and post this. Big tech is the single biggest threat facing our democracy. We know in 2016 social media companies had an outsized role in influencing our presidential election. With another presidential election months away, we need to take action now to curtail that influence. Leave alone the fact that he's using the very product he wishes to crush to reach his 1.5 million followers. Like a socialist, he relies on his intellectual betters to build the soapbox from which he calls for their destruction. But this isn't a matter of horrifying hypocrisy, no. This is a matter of property rights. If you came onto my property for a party and tried talking about how communism is the only moral form of government, or if you called my mother a whore, I would tell you to leave. It doesn't even have to be that dramatic. I could not like your face. I could have a hair over my ass and just decide to kick you out for no reason. It's my property, so beat it. I also practice discrimination in the other direction. I allow into my home people with whom I agree and whose company I enjoy. By doing this, am I silencing those with whom I do not wish to speak? Now let's say I own the Ford Hall Forum and I decide to never allow KKK members to speak. Well, I'm sure everyone could agree with that, so let's make it more controversial. Let's say I'll never allow liberals to speak there. Well, again, it's my property, and I have the right to deny anyone access to it. Twitter is such a forum. It doesn't matter that it's not a physical place. It doesn't matter that it's free to sign up or that there are terms of service. It doesn't matter whether it's considered a platform or a publisher. The only principle here is the concept of property rights. Your right to speak freely does not give me an obligation to give you a podium. As I was writing this up, something changed. Twitter, in a move of unmatched ignorance and tone deafness, fact-checked one of the president's tweets. I don't say this was a bad move because it was illegal or because it wasn't Twitter's right to do so. Of course, they were within their rights, but this was boneheaded because you just poked a very infantile, combative, thin-skinned, irrational bear. A bear that has been daring you to poke him for 3 years. A bear that has publicly and repeatedly called for your destruction in particular. And you just get right in there, real up close, and you just poke the fuck out of him. I mean, how did you see this going? The inevitable idiocy, of course, happened. The Trumpster drafted up an executive order. I read it, and it's filled with just enough rah-rah America, freedom of speech, woo, to almost make you overlook that he may as well be chanting freedom is slavery. I'll read some excerpted parts, but the whole thing is linked in the show notes. Quote, "It is the policy of the United States that large social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook, as the functional equivalent of a traditional public forum, should not infringe on protected speech. The Supreme Court has described that social media sites as the modern public square, quote, can provide perhaps the most powerful mechanisms available to a private citizen to make his or her voice heard, unquote. Communication through these channels has become important for meaningful participation in American democracy, including to petition leaders. These sites are providing a public forum to the public for others to engage in free expression and debate, unquote." Let's break a few of these things down because they really bother me. Large social media platforms. What does this mean? How large? And by what metric? User base? Amount of data? Engagement rate? Market penetration? Yearly revenue? This question is not answered. The functional equivalent of a traditional public forum. As determined by whom? I'm old enough to remember when everyone was concerned about privacy on Facebook, but now I guess it's a public forum. And what is a public forum anyway? The word public makes me think that it's owned by everyone, which is of course not possible. And even if it were, what are the limits? Can I just set up in some town square every day and blare the N-word on a megaphone? Oh, all right, there are limits. So who should decide them? I say the person who owns the property. Trump says it's Big Brother. Including to petition elected leaders. I only add this here because I despise that term. We do not elect leaders. We elect servants. They are chosen by the people to write and execute the law. They lead nothing. They are led. These sites are providing a public forum to the public for others to engage in free expression and debate. No, these companies are providing a service for its users to engage with in whatever way the companies allow, because it's their property. Twitter could decide to start manufacturing shoe inserts tomorrow and turn Twitter.com into a storefront. Maybe they should. Here's some more from the executive order. Quote, "The Attorney General shall establish a working group regarding the potential enforcement of state statutes that prohibit online platforms from engaging in unfair and deceptive acts and practices." Deception is usually easy to define. You say one thing, but something else is the truth. It's a lie. You sell me a car saying it's brand new, but there are 30,000 miles on the odometer when I come and see it. But what does it mean in the hands of someone like the president who sees, sometimes fairly, enemies around every corner, who thinks the media, again legitimately, is out to get him, or who has the entire force of the United States Armed Forces at his command, or who can rain down executive orders and spin up working groups to hunt you down? And the word unfair, I can't even imagine how that will be twisted. Fairness to whom? One user? To some undescribable gaggle of users? To the president? To balance? We can't rest until there are as many conservative voices as liberal voices on this platform. First off, that's a false binary. And second, what does that look like? Conservatives eschew the platform, so we need to cull the herd of liberals? This is madness. It's not doable, and even using the word unfair in this order is itself unfair. Quote, "The working group shall also collect publicly available information regarding the following. 1. Monitoring or creating watch lists of users based on their interactions with content or users, e.g., likes, follows, time spent, and 2. Monitoring users based on their activity off the platform." I don't know how anyone can read that and not have flashbacks to 1984. It's telescreens. It's Big Brother, except Orwell was wrong. They don't stare at you from a wall or a hidden microphone. They're in your pocket and watching the smallest of interactions. Are you on a list? I'll bet my bottom dollar I am. Frankly, I try to usually round out the podcast with a call to action or an uplifting message or something, but I'm at a loss. This is an attack on free speech and private property, and it's being buried under the headlines of COVID death and that dickbag of a cop that murdered a guy. Yes, that incident was terrible, and I don't mean to sound crass, but it pales in comparison to the loss of Americanism. We're pretty much it. We're the first and the last bastion of liberty in this world. Sure, places like Taiwan and Israel have a chance of getting there, but what happens when we disappear, when we fold in on the values that we hold and on our principles? Those tiny flames will be dashed from existence by the hordes of unwashed, unthinking morons. I was listening to some old recordings of Leonard Peikoff's radio show the other day, and somebody asked him what conditions he thought would be necessary for an armed revolt against the government. To paraphrase, he said, "As long as you have free speech, you can try to convince your fellow man that he is wrong. You can try to change the ideas of a culture. You can try to change things for the better." I fear that window is closing. You may not fear Trump's hand on the wheel, but what about AOC's or Ted Cruz's or Nancy Pelosi's? Get your speaking in now while you can. Voices like ours are always the first to go in the case of a political purge. We couldn't get through the week without something to do with COVID. Alyssa Milano made a fool of herself when she posted a picture of her and her family wearing masks. Hers was, as one might expect from a moron, knitted. She claimed that she put charcoal filters in it, and people rightly pointed out that this does nothing to stop viruses. I mean, neither do the regular masks, but this is not the point I wish to make. People posting about wearing masks as if they're doing some legendary act of service for their fellow man is asinine. If I were sick and absolutely had to leave my house, I surely would wear a mask to protect others. It's courteous and rights respecting, but the difference here is, as always when I get worked up about these things, force. When the state tells everyone that they must wear masks, you cannot then proclaim that you are a paragon of virtue because you're wearing one. Congratulations! You can follow orders. Good for you. You kind of know this in the back of your mind, but I'd like to make it explicit why this is. Virtue is something that you choose to practice. One practices virtue by making good choices. One can be said to be virtuous if they make good choices consistently. But when force is injected into the situation, when a gun or a club is introduced, there is no choice. The mind is shut down. No decisions can be made. No volition is at play. Force invalidates all virtue except the removal of that force. Got a topic or feedback? The podcast is at Americanitis Tech. You can also follow me at Dan Sagner. The last name is spelled Sierra Alpha Golf November Echo Romeo. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. If podcasts are your thing, I'm also on YouTube, so remember to annihilate that subscribe button. Patronize us at patreon.com/techside. Show notes are at techside.net/Americanitis. Theme music is by Eddie. I thank you all for listening. Later days.